Welcome, friends, to this, our second e-service. I hope you are staying safe and that you're staying healthy, wherever you may be, as we're entering into the second week of the national lockdown. Our discussion today is found in the book of Job, mainly Job chapter 23. And we're going to talk a bit about the question of suffering, about the question of pain, about the question of God's presence amidst all of this. A question that we can frame more or less as, where is a just God in an unjust world? Where is a good God in a world that doesn't seem to be that good? Now, the book of Job itself forms part of the wisdom tradition that we find in the Old Testament. Other books also found within the wisdom tradition are books like Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Lamentations. These four books, there may be more, I'm not quite sure, I may be missing one. But these four books give us some insight into the thoughts of the ancient Hebrew thinkers, into the philosophy of the ancient Hebrew people, the questions with which they concerned themselves, and the questions that often stood at the heart of their doubts within their faith. Job itself is very much orientated towards the question of suffering, the question of God's presence amidst suffering, the question of why does a good God allow suffering to happen? Why does a holy God allow unholy acts to happen? Two extreme manners in which this question is often answered takes the form of one of two responses. The first response, the initial instinct that people often have when they're confronted with the question of, but where is a good God when the world isn't good? Why does God allow evil things to happen? Is a denial of God's existence. Is to say, but that good God doesn't exist. Because everything I see around me tells me He doesn't exist. All the pain, all the hurt, all the suffering that happens each and every day is a negation of God's existence. How can He tell me that there is a good God when a woman is being raped? How can He tell me there's a good God when a child is being molested? How can you tell me there is a good God when a global society is being devastated by a pandemic? So that's the first extreme response we often find, we often encounter to the question of God's presence amidst the suffering, to the question of why does God allow suffering to happen, is to say, but He doesn't because He doesn't exist. He isn't there. The second extreme response goes something along the lines of, I know you're suffering, and I see you've got pain, and I see you've got hurt, and I know the world is evil, but remember, God is still good. I know there are bad things happening out there, and I know there may be bad things happening in here, but remember, God is still good. Don't doubt Him. Stay faithful. What's problematic with this response for me, mainly, is it seems to be a denial of the experience that we are having. It seems to me that someone is telling us, your suffering doesn't matter. What you're seeing happening around you doesn't really matter. If it leads you to a place of doubt, if it leads you to a place where you start thinking, but God isn't really good, then you must deny that experience. So, these two responses to the question of where is a just God in an unjust world takes the form of two denials. The first one is a denial of God's existence. The second one is a denial of the human experience, a denial of what we ourselves are feeling, what we are going through. Job, however, seems to offer a third alternative. Before we turn to the text, maybe it's good to have just a brief reminder of what the book of Job itself is about. Job starts off with some of the angels and the adversary coming to God, and God telling them, "Do you see my servant Job? Look how good he is. Look how holy he is. Look how righteous he is. Look how much he fears me. This truly is a man of God." And the adversary's response to God is, of course. Why would he not fear you? Why would he not praise you? Why would he not believe in you? See how you have blessed him throughout his life. See the family that you have given him. See the land that you have given him. See the prosperity and the peace that you have provided to him. Of course he'll bless you. Of course he'll love you. And God tells the adversary, fine. Okay. You can do whatever you want to with the things that Job has got, but you're not allowed to touch him. But everything that he has earned throughout his life, everything that he has been given, everything that he has received, I place over into your power. You can do what you want as long as you do not touch Job. And then the adversary goes forward and he strips Job of everything he has. Job's family dies, all his children die, all his possessions disappear, all the prosperity comes to nothing, until Job himself is left on an ash heap. And throughout all this, Job becomes angry at God. Job challenges him. Job asks him, "Why have you left me? Why do I not experience your presence? Why do I not feel that you are with me?" We also find 3 friends coming to Job, trying to help him understand why he is experiencing this suffering, why these things are happening to him. Because for all intents and purposes, Job was a good man. Job did not deserve this to happen. Job was unaware of the conversation that happened between God and the adversary. So to Job's eyes, all of these things seemed fundamentally unfair. He was sitting there and asking, "But why is this happening? What have I done to deserve this? I've praised you all my life, O Lord. I've blessed you all my life, O Lord. Yet still, you allow this pain and this affliction to descend onto me. You allow these hurts to touch my life." And the piece we're going to read today is one of Job's replies to a friend that tries to tell him, tries to help him understand as to why he's experiencing this. And this we find in Job chapter 23, and it reads as follows: "Even today my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy in spite of my groaning. If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say. Would he oppose me with great power? No, he would not press charges against me. There an upright man could present his case before him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. But if I go to the east, he is not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I've kept to his way without turning aside. I have not departed from the commands of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. But he stands alone, and who can oppose him? He does whatever he pleases. He carries out his decree against me, and many such plans he still has in store. That is why I am terrified before him. When I think of all this, I fear him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. Yet I'm not silenced by the darkness, by the thick darkness that covers my face. As we said earlier, our initial question is the question of where is God's presence amidst the suffering? And why does a good God allow the suffering to happen? And the two most common responses that you often get is firstly a denial of God's existence. A response that said, but a good God doesn't exist because the world is so obviously not good. And the second response is most often a denial of our experiences. A response that tells us, but your pain and your hurt isn't valid because God's goodness trumps it. Job was unwilling to fall into either of these responses. He was unwilling to deny God's existence, but he's also unwilling to deny the very real lived experience of suffering that he had. Job chooses to respond in a very interesting manner. He chooses to confront God with his experience. He chooses to go to God and to ask him, but why, Lord? Why do you allow me undeservedly to experience this pain? Why have you stripped me of everything I know, stripped me of everything I value, stripped me of everything I loved? Why do you do this to me? To Job, his relationship, his faith in God wasn't reliant on the goodness and the blessings that he received in his life. His belief in God wasn't grounded in whether God would bless him, whether God would ensure that no stone would harm his feet, whether God would ensure that no blemish would come upon his skin. Job's relationship with God, Job's faith in God, was grounded in the honest and an open relationship with God. A relationship when Job had the space to confront God with these very intense questions, with these very real fears and concerns that he had. A relationship where he felt able to go to God and to ask him, but why, Lord? Why do you allow this to happen? I feel you are being unfair. I feel you are not treating me right. I feel you are neglecting me. I feel you have deserted me. I do not experience your presence. Even if I turn north, south, east, or west, I feel abandoned. And even though I know that you are the mighty one, even though I know that you are the Holy One, I will not be silenced. I will ask you, where are you? And I will ask you, why do you allow this to happen? So Job seems able to hold on to both ends of these extremes, to acknowledge God's existence, the truth that God is always there, even though we may not be able to see him, even though we struggle to experience him. but also to acknowledge the truth of his experience. To acknowledge that he is suffering unjustly, that he is experiencing pain undeservedly, that he feels God is mistreating him relentlessly.